Hi, my name is Jim Denning, and I wrote the book Make It to Midnight, Learning to Live When You Want to Die. Today we're going to talk, I can't even talk. Today we are going to talk about post-traumatic stress. A lot of people refer to post-traumatic stress as post-traumatic stress disorder, which it can be argued either way, and we're going to kind of go through that. But post-traumatic stress or post-traumatic stress disorder is essentially, at some point in your life, a bad thing happened. Could be sexual abuse, could be a car wreck, could be a bicycle wreck, could be a fight or breakup or really anything. Something happened in your past. There were certain characteristics of that event that every time those characteristics are replayed currently in a different scenario, you are triggered by them. And so I'm going to kind of explain the nuts and bolts of that. All right, so let's start with the brain. So again, people look at the brain, this is a brain, it looks like a jello mold. One of the fallacies or whatever humankind is, we kind of assume all brains react equally to the same kind of stuff. So if there's a traumatic event, everybody kind of expects everybody to react the same way, and it doesn't really work that way. The sensitivity of the components in the brain kind of determines how much that the stress will impact the person now and later on. So this is really more an accurate view of the brain with all of its independent components. Let me turn my little laser pointer here. All right, with all of the independent components there. And so we're not going to go through all of these, but just realize that all of these components have to work together, and there's so much variability in these that really no people are the same. No two people are the same. No two people are going to react the same way to the same stimuli. And this is really, really important. And for parents, it's really important. You can't toughen up a brain. You can't traumatize somebody to toughen them up, prepare them for the real world. It doesn't work. All you end up doing is traumatizing somebody. So, an important thing to remember about the human brain is that it has not changed all that much since this guy. So, cavemen, way back when, science's latest I read is, human beings have been kind of in their current form for about 2.6 million years. Right? We've had electricity for like 100, maybe 150. So, for 2.6 million years, we had two jobs. Find food, don't become food. Okay, so for 2.6 million years, that was our entire goal in life. We didn't have bills and mortgages and insurance and daycare and car payments and any of that stuff. All of our problems were kind of constricted to that day. That's how we're wired. That's how we're built. Once I started living the way humans were built, Make It to Midnight, only worrying about today, my brain's like, oh, hey, I like this. This works. But anyway, pursuant to that, if our job was find food, don't become food, we had to have two mechanisms. The reward mechanism to find food and the fight, flight, or freeze mechanism to not become food. So we're going to talk about that. The fight, flight, or freeze mechanism is our response to threats, to dangerous events. Where trauma, anxiety, depression comes in is when you're in a situation where fight, flight, or freeze don't work. Let's say, for example, you're a young girl, 8, 9, 10-year-old girl, and there's somebody in your house that is abusing you. If you're going to bed and a door opens and a bad thing happens after that, none of these work. Fight doesn't work, flight doesn't work, freeze doesn't work. If you're in a house where there's lots of arguing and lots of yelling and just anxiety, these don't work. If you're in a job with a lot of office politics but you got bills to pay, you can't fight, you can't run, and you can't freeze. See the pattern here? Anything that you can't escape from is going to lead to problems. So post-traumatic stress is kind of similar to that, in that an event happens, it really tattoos our brain with, okay, watch out for this again, and responds accordingly. Let me give you an example. Ted passed away a few years ago. This is my dog, Ted. Ted was awesome. Ted was a golden retriever basset mix, and Ted was very independent, didn't care what you thought, had no desire to please you. Ted was all about Ted. Ted did not like children at all. If a kid got too close, Ted would try to bite the kid. I don't know what happened to Ted when he was younger, but something with children negatively impacted Ted. I just kept Ted away from kids. That was probably the easiest thing to do, and it seemed to work pretty well. But we can learn an important thing from this. So let's look at the human brain, kind of at the triune view here of the three different components. So we talked before, but I'll do a refresher. Brainstem is just basic reflexes. It's also heartbeat and blinking and all those things. But that's just, you touch a hand on a hot stove, your hand yanks away. That's what the brainstem does. The limbic system brain is a little more complex. The limbic system brain is very similar to Ted's in that at some point in Ted's life, a kid did a thing, negative thing to Ted. So the kid did something. The limbic part of the brain just remembered a kid did a bad thing. Very, very simple commands. A child, bad thing. Ted puts those two together. Anytime he sees a kid, kids are a threat, he responds accordingly. It's really elegant how it works because it's simple. It protects you. It's very little information. Kids, bad. There was a few years ago, I had a car wreck and I was exiting from one highway to another and the overpass was stopped because of traffic. I looked up, a guy's driving over the hill in a truck. I get rear-ended. Okay. The information, the most basic core information that my limbic system recorded at that point was overpass, stopped, wreck. Okay, so from that point forward, when I'd get on an overpass, I'd get a little nervous. It faded over time, but it was still, I'd stop on an overpass and it's like, just heart's beating a little bit. I was, oh yeah, okay, I was in a wreck before. Your brain does that to protect you so you react faster than you think. And then the third part of the brain is the prefrontal cortex. And this is the part of the brain that realizes, wait, the wreck that I got in was at 410 and I-10, but now I'm sitting on an exit at 35. I'm not in the same spot. It's not the same scenario. I don't see anybody behind me. That's the part that calms down. Now, why does it work this way? Because these three parts of the brain operate at very different speeds. This one is instantaneous. You touch a hot surface, your hand's going to get yanked away. This one is very, very fast because it's got very little information. All right, let's say back to the scenario of, a girl who's abused by somebody in the house. Let's say that her bedroom door squeaks. Okay, so what this part of the brain records is squeaking door, abuse happens. Fast forward 20 years. She hears a squeak in a door, right? This part of her brain knows that she's not the little girl anymore in the bedroom. This part of the brain knows that squeaking doors equal bad things. What's going to happen? She's going to have a reaction. Let's look at a little more detail at how it all works. So the thalamus is the part of the brain that takes in information. It takes it in from sight, sound, touch, and taste. All right. It doesn't do smell, honestly, because the nose is right here, the sinuses are right here, the amygdala is right here. It's just a straight shot. There's no reason for it to loop up to here and then back down. So that's why if you smell something that reminds you of something from time you were a kid, it's very vivid because there's no intermediary. You smell it, your amygdala reacts to it, your hippocampus reacts to it. So thalamus takes in all the information. Your hippocampus is kind of like a DVR that's just constantly recording. And it runs through, and it also has memory, but it's a constant DVR that's going. So let's say in my scenario with the wreck, I'm driving along, not really thinking about much, doing my thing, pull up in front of cars in traffic, I glance in the rearview mirror, I see a truck. The truck's coming in and he's not slowing down. Now what happens is my amygdala sets out an alarm. We're about to get hit. My hypothalamus gets the alarm and does this. It sends these ACTH chemicals, which is the fight or flight chemicals, down to the adrenal cortex. The adrenal cortex sends back cortisol, which is anxiety, and also adrenaline. Now, where's the trauma here? Fight, flight, freeze, none of them work. I'm trapped in traffic. I can't move forward, backwards, left or right. I'm in my car. There's no time to get out of the car. I'm along for the ride. So I brace, I get hit. Okay, there is the trauma. So my hippocampus, let me go back up. My hippocampus right here records that event, being in traffic, equal, or being in that particular situation where I'm stopped in traffic and there's nobody behind me equals a bad thing. Okay, some people it's just traffic is bad, they won't drive. This is the part of the brain that does that. And every time they try to get on the road, this alarm goes off again. All right, so that's how post-traumatic stress works, in that whenever something happens just very vaguely that reminds the person of a traumatic event, all of these things happen, because better safe than sorry, right? Sends out all the chemicals. Now, where does the disorder come in? The disorder comes in that, we'll say, somebody who had been abused as a child, in the squeaking door thing. She's at work, hears a squeaking door, has a panic attack, right? That's a disorder, that's a problem. Okay, so there's the argument back and forth if it's a disorder or not. Now, another thing that makes us uniquely human is the division of our prefrontal cortex. So, what also happens is when there's no trigger, sometimes our brain just comes up with stuff. So these are the three components of the prefrontal cortex. The dorsolateral prefrontal cortex is the part of the brain, the part of the prefrontal cortex that's doing an activity. Okay, I am here, I am talking, I am looking at the screen, I am totally engaged in my dorsolateral prefrontal cortex because I'm doing a thing. It is very task oriented. It's called the central executive network. It's doing its thing. Okay. The ventromedial prefrontal cortex is the part of the brain that, say, daydreams, that comes up with scenarios. So you're laying in bed at night, or you're sitting in a waiting room or whatever, your brain starts coming up with stuff. What did I do today? What am I going to do tomorrow? What did I do last week? Why did I do that thing in third grade that's still bothering me? All of these things come up. The dorsolateral is the one that's looking backwards the ventromedial is looking backwards and forwards in time for possible ways to protect you, lessons learned, mistakes made, how to not make those mistakes again. All right. Now, the orbital frontal prefrontal cortex is the part of the brain that talks back to the limbic system, talks back to that. So the orbital frontal talks back to here. So keep bouncing around. If we're at this slide and we've got this going on, right, our brain is amped up with anxiety chemicals, panic attack, all those things for no real good reason. Okay, so if we have lots of triggers, or our brain is sensitive to these things, then what will happen is the orbital frontal prefrontal cortex will sense that there is anxiety chemicals in the brain. This is really important. The orbital frontal prefrontal cortex will sense the anxiety chemicals in the brain, talk to the ventromedial prefrontal cortex, and start coming up with scenarios. Okay? So the brain says we're in danger. Now, you could be sitting at home, in a waiting room, in your car, at work, whatever. But if that limbic system trips, that hypothalamal pituitary adrenal axis starts rolling, it tells the brain you need to be afraid. The orbital frontal prefrontal cortex tells the ventromedial prefrontal cortex we need to be afraid. The ventromedial starts looking backwards and forwards in time. Okay, what do I need to be afraid of? Well, this happened and this happened. Well, what about this? Well, what if they find out about this? Well, what if that email goes through? Oh my God, did I send that thing? Did I pay this bill? All of those anxieties start tripping because of that. Then what happens is the anxieties trip, the orbital frontal prefrontal cortex says, oh my God, we have things to be scared of, when you really don't. And this is the part here where it says negative feedback loop. That's what happens, is we spin in those things. Okay, so then what we do naturally is we distract ourselves. We distract ourselves by engaging what? The dorsolateral prefrontal cortex. So we force ourselves to be busy to get these two to shut up. But that can only work for so long. So that's how the automated thoughts, all of the negative thinking that goes on happens, is if you've got a predisposition for anxiety, either because the way your brain was made or because the way your life is played out, this is the mechanism that comes up with the automatic negative thoughts. The best way to stop that, I have found, is one, if it is not happening today, it does not get engaged emotionally. All right, so if I have a talk I've got to do next week or something like that, I will not worry about it. I will prepare for it. I will get everything prepared and everything ready, and I will hopefully do a good job. I will not stress on it. If any kind of event that has any kind of emotion, I will worry about that day. It takes training. It's not something you do overnight, but you can do it. And then just keep things in context. The other thing is, this is the part of the brain right here, the ventromedial prefrontal cortex, that I call slick. That's the part of the brain that I talk to. And so when he starts spiraling out of control, I'm like, dude, it's like, we are not doing this today. Calm down. All right. And I have to listen. So if Slick is freaking out about something, I can't power through it. I can't just, white knuckle it. There's days if I don't sleep well, the adrenal cortex is kicking, I've got anxiety for no real good reason. I know I have to rest that day. I know that trying to power through that is just going to cause damage. It's like, okay, well, it sucks. I've got this this ring. I think I showed this in another video. It tracks, throwing it around. It tracks my sleep. It's got little electrodes in it, and it tracks my sleep. And so I know, like last night I slept 6 hours, but I slept pretty good according to the other readings. So I slept 6 hours. I'm good. I will be okay today. I can do things like this today, but if I had slept 4 hours, I wouldn't attempt this video. You've got to listen to that part of your brain. Last part we're going to talk about is left and right hemisphere of these things. So the right prefrontal cortex is behavior, inhibition, avoidance, and emotional regulation. So this is the part of the brain that is frightened by, just in a state of like, okay, I'm afraid to do, like, say that, there's a tryout for a band at work or something. I don't know, something where you're going to try out for something. Or, sorry, better example, there's somebody you're interested in, somebody you want to date, but the right prefrontal cortex is like, she's out of my league, he's out of my league, they probably got a girlfriend or a boyfriend or something. This is all the doubt stuff. The left side, behavioral activation, approach, emotional regulation, is a part like, I really want to date that person. So why is this important? Go back 20, 30, 40,000 years, right? The left part of the brain is the one that approached and went out hunting and searching for food. The right side of the brain is the part that's like, okay, I'm going to go look for food, but I also got to watch for bears and things like that. So this is the parts of the brain where if we are intentional about, since we don't have to really worry about bears anymore, if we are intentional about approaching things we want, doing things we want, finding those rewards, finding those successes, just in small amounts, you can get that left prefrontal cortex to start growing a little bit. And when you do that, you're less afraid, you have less anxiety, the world's a little bit safer place, and all of these traumas can start to subside. They're never going to go away, but they can subside. And then the anterior cingulate cortex just kind of is the referee. The last part I'm going to hit here is the social pain network. So pursuant to that, the social pain network, this is just a kind of a bonus thing that's pretty nifty. So the anterior cingulate cortex, the dorsal anterior cingulate cortex, is the part of the brain that manages pain, physical and emotional. So this is the part of the brain that's like, sticks and stones will break my bones, but words will never hurt me. Yeah, wrong. They will. And they will through the same network. But good news is that if you have that social pain, you can take Tylenol. There's an article in Psychology Today that's really cool about that. So anyway, sorry, his phone was ringing. Anyway, here's the information on the book. Hope you enjoyed the presentation, and I will talk to you soon.